good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Thanks again for joining us for the Faith Life podcast of Discovery Fellowship Church. I'm your host, Pastor Nathan, here with my co-host, Pastor Matt.
Hey, guys.
And we are in the studio again with video for the second week in a row. We're trying out this whole video thing, and it's pretty fun. If you got a chance to check out the video version of the podcast, let us know. Email podcast@dfchurch.com. And let's go ahead and jump right in. We've got a packed episode today. So we're going to start off with our In the News segment. Matt, what do you have for me?
Yeah, the biggest thing that I saw in the news today was the SpaceX rocket ship that they ran their test flight today. And unfortunately, a few minutes after taking off, it exploded. Good news is no one was on board.
Right. It was just a test.
There was just money that exploded.
I wonder how much this rocket costs. Like, how much does it mess up for that to explode?
Yeah, I don't know, but
they
said they learned something. So
they said they've learned a lot. They still are considering it a success. Now, this is intended to be the type of rocket that could take people to Mars. That's kind of the idea. Like, this is the one that they think could get us to another planet.
Well, this test run gives me a lot of confidence that that's happening soon.
Well, and to be fair, we do know that a lot of early test flights go wacky.
Right.
So it's not absurd. Now, in the Washington Post, they say 4 minutes into its flight, it is not known what caused the explosion or whether SpaceX officials deliberately destroyed the rocket as it tumbled out of control over the Gulf of Mexico.
Okay.
So there is potentially maybe they had some other issues, and out of caution, they had to blow it up.
Yeah.
Which, if your rocket has like a self-destruct button, that's also a little scary. So I don't know.
Let's just say I won't be on the first mission to Mars.
Well, here's the thing. The first mission to Mars, most likely, they are going to, it's potentially like a one-way trip. Like, it's a scary thing to think about trying to go to Mars because you don't know what's going to happen. Did you ever see that movie, The Martian?
Yeah.
Matt Damon?
Yep.
It was really good. He learned how to grow potatoes.
Is that what's going to happen?
If Matt Damon goes, does that happen?
All right, so let's send Maddie.
Well, that was a great movie because they had potatoes on Mars, which is a lot of fun.
And that's what makes it a great movie.
Yes.
You heard it here first, folks.
If your movie has Mars and has potatoes, you know it's going to succeed. Well, let's jump into our main topic because, again, last week we went for a long time and we didn't even get through this list. And now we're going to do the same thing again
Jump
today.
Back in.
We'll see how far we get. So if you missed it last week, we were going through an article on what was the website again, Matt?
Yeah, atheist.org. It's the American Atheist website.
So the American Atheist website has put out a list of what they consider the biggest contradictions in the Bible.
Yes.
And we decided, let's look at them. Let's see what we think about those. Because, again, these are what the American Atheist Association says is
like, this is
problem.
why we can't trust the Bible.
This is why we can't
because of these things.
And so we went through a few of those last week. Again, go back, check it out.
Yeah.
And let us know what you thought of those ones. You can email us again, podcast@dfchurch.com. I didn't mention it earlier, but take a minute. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you downloaded this. Let us know what you think. It helps others to find this podcast as well. So if you haven't done so already, go ahead and leave us a review there.
And send this to your friends.
Yeah.
Like, share it with some of your friends who you think might be interested in some of the stuff we talk about.
Right, and especially like with this topic, it's a pretty interesting one because a lot of people, if they're not a Christian yet, they might be thinking, I can't trust the Bible. So let's talk about that. Let's get their thoughts on why they don't trust the Bible and go from there. So share this with a friend. And again, podcast@dfchurch.com. Now, we're going to jump right back into that list. We're going to go with the next one on there. Matt, what do we have?
Yeah, so next on our list, the headline is personal injury.
Okay.
And so there's two verses here. Exodus chapter 21, verses 23 to 25.
Okay.
Thou shalt give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burning for burning, wound for wound, stripe for stripe.
Okay.
And then in Matthew chapter 5, verse 39, this is Jesus talking Sermon on the Mount. It says, resist not evil. Whoever hits you on your cheek, on your right cheek, turn to him the other also.
Right.
So this one's really interesting.
I like this one. This one's kind of fun, actually.
Mostly because it makes me, like, again, go back to the same things we talked about last week, where you're just taking words.
Right.
Like, you're not taking any sort of context.
No.
You talked about last week how context matters, and there's prescriptive and there's descriptive. There's things that are just telling us history. Like, every one of these, I feel like that applies to again.
Right.
And so, yeah, you're looking at Exodus 21. This is not related to just my everyday life. The context of this actually looks like it's more of like judicial.
Right. This is, I mean, Exodus is, again, like you said, context matters. So Exodus, we're looking at the law, like the legal system that was existing in Israel at the time. What was the exact verse in Exodus 21?
So we're looking at Exodus 21, verses 23 through 25.
Okay. And so what is our context of this? Now, we're talking about what happens if people injure each other. What happens when somebody assaults another person? All right. Now, Exodus, again, we're looking at the legal code of Israel. They have to figure out, what do we do? What does the law look like when somebody attacks somebody else? And they say it's an idea of justice, right? So that if you do something to somebody, you can expect a comparable result as a punishment, right? So don't do something unless you would be okay with that happening to you. And, that's the idea here. So what happens in this Exodus passage is justice is served. They're doing a legal code. Now, what is Jesus talking about in Matthew, the Sermon on the Mount? Again, what's the context? Well, it's Matthew what?
Matthew chapter 5.
Matthew chapter 5. Now, this whole Sermon on the Mount is great because he starts with a lot of starting at the Old Testament law and then giving an even more like in-depth standard.
So it's like, you've heard that it was said, but I say to you.
Right. So in 21, you've heard that the ancients were told, that's a fun translation, you shall not murder, and whoever commits murder shall be answerable in court. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother shall be answerable to the court. And whoever says to his brother, you good for nothing, shall be answerable to the Supreme Court. And so he says, like, you don't murder is what the law said. Right. But I'm saying even being angry is like as serious. And he says, don't commit adultery. But I'm telling you, if you're looking at people lustfully, like, he's actually not going opposite of what they say. He's going stricter than what they say in a lot of ways.
Well, and a lot of it seems, especially when he gets into the turn the other cheek thing, it makes me think vengeance, like revenge, I shouldn't seek. Because we have the same situation from Exodus in our courts today. Right. Not exactly eye for eye, tooth for tooth, but if I damage your personal property, and
you're responsible.
I'm responsible to repay that, either fix it, replace it, or just pay you off for it, right? Like, that's my responsibility in our court system.
Right.
If you were to take me to court over that, Jesus is saying, look, don't take vengeance into your own hands. If someone harms you, like, forgiveness is what you need to seek after first, and reconciliation is what you need to seek after first. Like, let the courts do what the courts do.
Right.
Let God do what God's in charge of.
Right. Definitely. There's that's the other thing I was going to say is there's a difference in who is enacting what. Right. Because he said, you've heard it say eye for eye, tooth for tooth, but I say to you, do not show opposition. Whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other also. Whoever wants to sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak also. Whoever forces you to go to 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks of you and do not turn away. So he's saying, yes, the legal system was all these things, but when this happens to you, you don't, as a Christian, as a follower of Jesus, we don't have to take advantage of what legally we could. Right. But instead, we're going to humble ourselves in this scenario. We're going to say, you know what? We could have this retributive action, but I'm not going to be the one to do that. Right. And maybe that means... Now, this gets into a different question. It's like, if somebody hurts you, should you go to the police, right? Or should you let people abuse you? Right. And when it's you, it's also a different question versus when you see somebody else getting abused or hurt. Yeah. We don't get to turn the cheek on behalf of somebody else. I can call the police and say, look, this guy's beating his wife or whatever. Right. And it's like, that's wrong. He needs to go to jail and all this stuff.
Yeah, we let the judicial system do what it's supposed to do.
Right.
It seems like the context of Matthew 5, because he's talking to like actual people, citizens,
Right.
He says, I tell you to do this. So it seems like maybe it was common that they were kind of taking that vengeful action on themselves.
Right.
And Jesus saying, that's not your place.
Right. That's interesting. And I also know, I've read a little bit about this, that question about whoever forces you to go 1 mile, go with 2.
Right.
There's some historical context of Roman soldiers could force any citizen to carry all their heavy equipment with them for 1 mile. And so Jesus is saying, yes, there's this, it's an interesting side note, because he's saying, look, there's this unjust law that's right now. Right, the government says they can force you to carry their stuff, even though you shouldn't have to.
Right,
and Jesus is saying, not only should you do what they're saying, even though it's unfair, you should go above and beyond.
Yeah.
So that kind of goes into a different subject about like what do it looks like with us in relation to authority.
Yeah.
But that I always found that interesting.
Yeah. There's a lot of kill them with kindness type of situation where it's like if someone wants to do you harm.
Right.
Respond with kindness.
Right.
That's what turning the other cheek, that's going the extra mile, those types of things might lean towards a little bit. So
yeah, and again, here's another thing that we've talked about, but I think it's really important to mention who is the intended audience, right? This is not a recipe in Matthew for legislation. Right. This is not saying legally the police need to do this, right? He's saying as a Christian, as a follower of Jesus, when somebody does something to you, you need to be able to say, in this situation, I'm going to turn the other cheek. I'm going to not pursue what I legally could potentially. Yep. It's interesting. Okay.
All right, ready for the next one?
I'm ready.
All right, this one's circumcision.
Oh, no.
So in Genesis 17, oh, no. In Genesis 17, this is my covenant, which you shall keep between me and you and your seed after you. Every man-child among you shall be circumcised.
Every man-child. Okay.
And then Galatians 5, verse 2
Paul
says,
messing it up.
Paul messing it up again. If you are circumcised, Christ shall profit you nothing.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
So that...
In Genesis 17, it says you have to be circumcised.
Right.
In Galatians 5, it says if you're circumcised, then Christ will profit you nothing.
Right. So I'm going to go out on a limb before we even get too far into this.
Uh-oh.
I'm going to say context is going to matter.
Whoa. Man, there's a common theme here, right?
It is. It's like if you're going to say something is a problem, you've got to look at it more than just a very shallow surface level.
This article is not giving a good image for the atheist. It seems like it's a very childish argument. And
so right. and I get it. I mean, it's very easy in maybe it's a cultural thing.
Yeah.
Our attention span is so short. And, we have so much of people are like, basically just read the headline and then nothing else type thing, right? Mm-hmm. And so people don't want to take the time to study something. So, and I mean, I guess that's fine. If you are an atheist and you don't want to believe in the Bible, whatever, don't believe in the Bible. But if you're going to start saying, here's all the problems with it, and you don't want to take the time to actually study it, then, I mean, it would be the same thing as me going up to a Muslim and saying, I haven't read the Quran. I just read somebody else put 2 verses from it, and so it's all false.
Right.
That wouldn't be really fair to them. Yeah. I don't know. So again, let's look at context. Let's start with the context of Galatians, right? Galatians really is all about justification.
Yeah.
Right. There's a running theme throughout it that justification cannot come through observance of the law, but through faith in Jesus. Mm-hmm. And that when we say justification, we're talking about what is our standing between us and God. Right. We have sinned and offended a holy God. We have that relationship broken. How is that relationship restored? And Paul is saying a lot of you are trying to earn that salvation through observance of the law, including things like circumcision. Mm-hmm. And so the large theme running through it, not that the law is bad and not that obeying any of the law is bad,
right?
but that if that is what you are counting on, you're gonna fail. And what he says is that if you are so proud because you think, well, I obeyed the commandment of circumcision, therefore I am good before God.
Right.
He says, we just have to go one verse later. So he says, well, let's start on verse 1. If it was for freedom that Christ set us free. Therefore, keep standing firm and do not be subject again to a yoke of slavery. Look, I, Paul, tell you that if you have yourself circumcised, Christ will be of no benefit for you. That's the verse they're saying. And I testify again to every man who has himself circumcised that he is obligated to keep the whole law. You have been severed from Christ. You are seeking to be justified by the law. You have fallen for grace. For we, through the Spirit by faith, are waiting for the hope of righteousness. For in Christ Jesus, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision means anything but faith working through love. What he's saying is if you are counting on this to be what saves you, then you have to follow all of the law perfectly, start to finish of your whole life in order to be saved. And we all know that nobody can do that. And so what he's saying is not that, he even says right here, in Christ Jesus, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision means anything. Right? That's not the issue. The issue is, what is your hope of salvation? And so it doesn't nullify what they said in Exodus. It's just that's not what saves you.
Right. And there, again, every one of these contradictions, at least so far, are making the assumption that everything from, because a lot of this is Old Testament versus New Testament. So everything from the Old Testament is 100% applicable to everyone about everything today or in the New Testament. But Scripture points out an Old Covenant and a New Covenant. Paul talks a lot about that. And in Hebrews, we hear more about that as well, where Old Testament, that law is spoken specifically to a group of people at a specific time. And Jesus comes and he talks a lot about the law and says, you've heard this. We just talked about that in Matthew 5. But I say, here's what life looks like as a Christ follower. And so, circumcision, Paul's saying it's meaningless.
Apart in and of Christ, itself, any part of the law doesn't
do it or don't. It doesn't matter. Jesus is what matters, is what Paul's saying here.
Well, and we look, again, Old Testament, you see that circumcision was like a sign of the covenant between God and Moses. And now Jesus, the Last Supper, says this blood is a new covenant I'm making. Like this idea of different covenants really comes in the breadth of the entirety of the Bible. But again, that's asking people to understand a bigger view of the Bible, which can be hard to do.
Makes sense.
All right. We're knocking these ones right out. We're going to be done before you know it.
All right. So we go from circumcision to incest.
Oh,
So, and this is all Old Testament that
we're not going to run into this old versus new.
Versus new. However, there's a timeline that's still, I think, important, but we'll get to that, I guess.
I'm going to guess so.
So we're starting in Deuteronomy 27, verse 22. Cursed is he that lies with his sister, the daughter of his father or the daughter of his mother. And Leviticus 20, verse 17, if a man shall take his sister, his father's daughter, or his mother's daughter, it's a wicked thing. But
incest is bad.
You see in Genesis.
Oh, boy.
And they're not directly quoting a verse, but they say, but what was God's reaction to Abraham, who married his sister, his father's daughter? And then Genesis 17, and God said unto Abraham, as for Sarah, your wife, I bless her and give you a son also from her. So Abraham married his sister, his father's daughter.
Now, was it his direct sister or is it his father's daughter, like half sister?
It's a half. Halvesies, I think, is what we're working on here. But you ready for this?
I'm excited.
I know this is going to be baffling. Abraham. This is in Genesis. That we're getting his story, the history of Abraham. And this law was given post-Abraham.
It was, correct.
Leviticus and Deuteronomy, timeline-wise, not just like order in my Bible, like when I read it, but timeline-wise comes after the life of Abraham in Genesis. And so what's super interesting here is I'm applying a law to someone who wasn't alive during that law. Right? It's like saying, well, George Washington should be arrested because he didn't pay his Colorado state income tax. Well, he was never under that law. At all.
Now, if I can play the atheist advocate
let's
for
do
a
it.
minute, let's do this. All right. So here's the question that you'd answer. Because on a surface level, yes, that makes sense. This law wasn't given until Moses. Abraham lived way before Moses. Now, if this law is the law of God, doesn't it still apply? Like, if this is what God wants, why did God bless that marriage?
Yeah, that's good. So a few things we can think through. The human lineage was a little bit cleaner, for lack of a better word, during the time of Abraham.
Okay.
You also have other instances of this.
You have instances of at least assumed
incest.
Incest.
Yep. Depending on your interpretation of other things. So
when we look at how Genesis 1 through 6 are generifically interpreted, right?
Right. So if you go Adam and Eve were the only humans.
Right.
At the time of creation, right? When God created man in the garden, they were booted out of the garden. They had kids. They populated the entire earth. So if this is the way you're interpreting that, then their kids had to have kids with each other.
Right.
That's the only way you're going to repopulate.
Correct.
Same thing if you look at the flood, if you view it as a global flood and the only humans that survived was Noah and his family, there's another case of incest.
Okay.
So even if it was atheist advocate, well, if it's God's law, doesn't it apply universally for all time, no matter when it was mentioned?
Right.
Sure. But does that mean that what happened with Abraham is a prescription for everyone?
Right.
Or is it, guess what? Abraham wasn't perfect.
Right.
He made mistakes too. David made mistakes. He was also still considered a man after God's own heart.
Right. God can still bless and use circumstances, even if we didn't do what we should have done. So again, I think you're right. I think it is not as much as God's blessing Sarah with child doesn't show that God has approved everything that Abraham did.
Right.
But I also think you're right that contextually we look at the Old Testament law as now, I think this sword cuts both ways. If we're going to say contextually the law was for the Jewish people, and that for that time and that place, we're under a new covenant. As Christians, can we use that in arguments now for policy and things like that? Can we say like when we talk about, all right, so we're gonna say that like same sex, like not necessarily the attraction, but the action of it, is that is a sinful action, right? And a lot of Christians will go to the Old Testament where it's much more explicitly stated. Right. Can we as Christians, are we trying to have our cake and eat it too when we do that?
I think we are. I think we're picking and choosing what we want to still apply from that Old Testament, that Old Covenant. Right. We want to pick and choose what applies today. But I also argue that the New Testament speaks into that really well, and that's a different podcast, I think. I think you're right, and I would agree with you on that. So, all right, well, let's just move on then. So to summarize, incest bad.
Summarize, incest is bad. Yeah. So wait, next question. Yeah. Now that we are no longer under that covenant, is it back to being okay? No. Okay. Yeah. Just for genetic purposes. Maybe it's not a sin as much as it's just gross. I don't know. Yeah, aren't there some states that like allow it? But at a certain level, right? It's not like my sister, but my cousin or my second cousin or whatever. Man. Yeah, I have a lot of family in Kentucky, and we say that our family tree is a wreath. If you're from Kentucky, I'm sorry. I would apologize, except his family's from Kentucky, and he's the one talking about it. So I'm just gonna. No, it was never. We never really had that much, but there was. I think there was probably some distant cousins marrying somewhere. Right, and it's. Yeah. There's a lot of genetics. We can get into the science of why, even if the Bible didn't talk about it all, it still might be a bad idea. Well, that's why there was like a lot of hemophilia in the royal families. It was because of inbreeding. Yeah. And it led to an increase in that genetic disorder. I remember learning that somewhere. That's good. Yeah. All right. Well, it's not good. Hemophilia is not good. No, but like that insight into history is good information to have. Real quick, before you go to the next one, I just think it's really funny. So hemophilia, we don't hear about that as much anymore. Like it happens. You still get that. But then I think about that word itself, right? So hemo means blood, like a hematologist is somebody who does blood. Yeah. Philia is Greek for love, like brotherly love. Right. So they're people who love to bleed. That's what that word means. Isn't that funny? Because they just bleed and don't stop. But,
right.
So we call it.
But the word is they love
to bleed.
I'm not sure anyone with hemophilia loves
I don't think so either. Their body does. I mean, again, when you think about it, when you're coming up with this term, that's what you come with. Like your body just seems to really like to bleed.
Let it out. Just let it go. On that note,
let's keep going.
Oh, this next one's interesting. So this one is trusting God. A good man obtains favor of the Lord, Proverbs chapter 12.
Okay.
And then it says, now consider the case of Job. After commissioning Satan to ruin Job financially and to slaughter his shepherds and children to win a petty bet with Satan, God asked Satan, Job 2:3, have you considered my servant Job? There's none like him on the earth, a perfect and an upright man, one that fears God and hates evil. And still he holds fast to his integrity. Although you moved me against him, I'm trying to translate Old King James Version into my head.
What's the part of Job
although
that
thou
in?
movest me against him, there you go, to destroy him without cause. Although you moved me against him to destroy him without cause. Job chapter 2, verse 3.
The Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? For there's no one on earth like him, a blameless and upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil. And he still holds firm to his integrity, although you incited me against him to ruin him without cause.
Yeah, so Proverbs 12:2 is saying a good man obtains favor from the Lord.
Okay.
And yet in Job, we see that
was
Job was a good man
who got
all the curses.
All the curses from Satan.
Because the way they worded
it is really funny.
God commissioned Satan to ruin Job so that he could win a petty bet with him.
I don't know if... Okay.
So Job is an interesting situation. A lot of people have an issue with it. So what's happening here?
Well, let's start first of all with what are the Proverbs? Proverbs are generalized pieces of advice.
Okay.
Rules for good living in general. You know, it's if you do this, here's kind of the result.
Yeah.
If you're lazy, you're not going to get a lot. And if you are evil, eventually you'll get what's coming to you. If you obey your parents, you'll have a long and healthy life. These are not hard and fast rules for life. And I think that's one of the things, again, context matters, that we need to remember is that when we look at the Proverbs, these are generalized ideas for overall. Now, that's not saying if you do this and you don't get the result that it's not true, because it's not a hard and fast rule.
Right.
It's a generality overall.
Okay.
Now, what's going on with Job? Job is an interesting book that me personally, I'm not even sure genre-wise how it all fits.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is that, first of all, is it a historical narrative or is it a historical parable?
Okay.
And again, when we talk about biblical inerrancy, I think either way you go with that, you're not saying it's not. People think literal and true are the same thing. And in this, and there's instances where something can be true, but that doesn't mean it's literal. Like any parable Jesus tells, none of those were true stories that actually happened. Now, Jesus
really told the story.
He really told the story, but the story was there to make a point, right? You don't need to be like, oh, I can go and find the house of the woman who lost the coin and had to sweep and find it, right? That's missing the point because you're looking at it too literally versus what the truth of it was, the metaphor of it. So let's look at Job. Job, the reason I wonder about this is when we get through it further, you have Job's friends, and they are talking in this long, flowing, beautiful Hebrew poetry. People don't talk like that. So at the very least, we have a very stylized account.
Right.
Now, is there a true kernel of it? Well, does it ever say that this actually happened? Or is this, again, a bigger point to tell us what good and evil are like and why good things happen to, bad things happen to good people, things like that. All of that aside, I think you're looking at Job and you're saying, well, he followed God, but still bad things happened.
Yeah.
And so the bigger question being answered by Job is that why do bad things happen to good people? And we can see part of it is the way Satan works in the world
Yeah.
and like all these
Yeah.
different factors and all the different dialogues that people have
Yep.
through that. So it has nothing to do with a generalized proverb
Yeah.
of, you do good and good things happen. There's still going to be instances where bad things.
When we see that elsewhere in scripture too, right? Like you have Christ's followers who were stoned to death.
Right.
They were considered good people,
Right.
potential, and then how do you define good is another question, right?
Right.
And so, yeah, I agree. We're taking a proverb, which is a
Right.
generalized principle. The assumption would be from Proverbs 12 that live a good life and you might have some good results.
Right.
Not you will be completely pain-free and hurt-free and curse-free for all of eternity.
Right.
That's not what that's saying. And then, but we're taking that, we're assuming that.
Right.
Well, if I'm a generally good person, I'm going to have a generally good life.
Right.
Then we go back to this account of Job, whether parable or actual historical person and story,
Yeah.
no matter which way you look at it, we're taking a general principle and applying it to a specific situation,
Right.
and saying it must always be this way.
Right.
God will always bless you. This is the prosperity gospel, right?
Right.
God will always bless you if you do good for him.
Right.
So-
and actually probably prosperity gospel uses verses like those proverbs
Yeah.
to make their point. But
Yep.
again, they're just as much missing the point of the proverb.
Right.
Okay. Let's do maybe one or two more. How
One
many
more
are left?
puts us, so we did 5 last week.
Okay.
There's 15 total. So we just do 5 each time.
Do 5
so
each
we got
time.
one more.
One more. Perfect. I love it.
This is the holy lifestyle.
Oh, the holy lifestyle.
A holy lifestyle. Wait, what? Okay.
Okay.
So Ecclesiastes 9:7.
Okay.
And I'm going to get a different translation here.
Thank
It says,
you.
"Go, eat your food with gladness, drink your wine with a joyful heart, for God has already approved what you do."
Okay.
And then 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 30. Let me get that in a different translation here. "Those who mourn as if they did not, those who are happy as if they were not, those who buy something as if it were theirs to keep." The only part of that they're quoting is those that are happy as if they are not.
I don't understand what this contradiction is.
Yeah, what do they want? So Paul, in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, Paul is urging Christians to live as if our relationship with Christ is more important than this other stuff,
Okay.
right? That seems to be what's happening. More important than this, our mortality, right?
Right.
Our eternity is more important than that.
Then sure. Okay.
Now, maybe he's referring to this. What I mean, brothers.
Go then and eat your bread in happiness. Drink your wine with a cheerful heart, for God has already approved your works. See that your clothes are white all the time, and there's no lack of oil on your head. Enjoy life with the wife whom you love, all the days of your futile life. That's funny, which he has given you under the sun. All the days of your futility. This is the reward in life in your work, which you have labored under the sun. So, I mean, all right. So again, Ecclesiastes is what? It's about futility of life. It's
Yeah.
about how life is this repetitive, monotonous cycle and nothing really matters.
This is embarrassing for the atheists.
Yeah, I don't understand what they're trying to say.
I'm trying
but
to-
let's try to
Okay.
talk through it. So if that's now that's usually where we start with Ecclesiastes, and a lot of times people end there, like everything is meaningless and that's the end.
Right.
Now, if you read through the whole thing, the message is everything is meaningless unless God, right? And once God enters to the equation, that actually provides meaning and purpose to everything else you're doing. But, and I think the atheists would agree, everything you do is going to be meaningless if God doesn't exist.
Right.
Actually, we can all probably agree on that. If there is no God,
Then this is all meaningless.
everything you do, whether
It's
you
futile.
do something
Yep.
fun, something sad, nothing you do actually matters in the end, because ultimately the universe will die a cold, slow
Nothing
death.
really matters.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was singing the song.
I like it. There'll be, heat death of the universe. Either
Yeah.
the universe will get colder and darker and slower, and eventually all matter will cease to exist, or it will recollapse on itself and all matter will cease to exist. Either way, if there is no God, ultimately everything is pointless. And that's kind of the point of
Yeah.
Ecclesiastes also. Now,
Right.
what's Paul saying?
It seems like Paul is focusing on like an attitude of your heart.
Okay, what was the what was the verse in Corinthians?
1 Corinthians 7:30. Right? It's almost like there's this, he's talking about some events that might like point towards the return of Jesus happening at any moment. And so Paul maybe has written about how
he's talking about getting married. Like if you go back, he says, "Are you bound to a wife? Do not seek to be released. Are you released from a wife? Do not seek a wife. If you have married, you have not sinned. If a virgin marries, she has not sinned. Yet such people as yourselves will have trouble in this life, and I'm trying to spare you. But the time has been shortened, so from those who have wives should be as though they had none, and those who weep as though they did not weep, and those who rejoice as though they did not rejoice, and those who buy as though they did not possess, and those who use the world as though they did not make full use of it. For the present form of this world is passing away." He's just talking about, it's all about marriage in general, this whole section, and about like how you live. We live in the world we are, but we know that the better one is coming, right?
Right.
I don't understand.
We're focused on that like eternal element here.
Right.
Which it almost seems like that's actually what Ecclesiastes is about. Like all this stuff is meaningless without God, but with God, like that's where our focus on. So then go and live your life in light of your salvation, your eternity with him.
Yeah. If you're a member of the American Atheist Association, can you let us know what the contradiction was here?
Yeah.
Like email podcast@dfchurch.com, because I legitimately don't understand. Like all these other ones, I at least see the point you're trying to make. I don't see what the point you're trying to make is with this one.
Here's what's funny. So I just looked up and tried to like see if anyone else commented on this.
Yeah.
And so there's this little short blog, maybe a memo that was sent to staff of the Berean call. Okay. Anyway, quoting this thing from the Atheist article, and then it says, "This really should be an embarrassment to point it out as a contradiction. This passage from Ecclesiastes, is talking about a behavior. Passage from 1 Corinthians is talking about attitude. It's evident from the context from the words used in each passage, had the atheist been looking for meaning rather than loopholes." Right. And I think that's what's happening, is they were just looking for anything to get someone to doubt its reliability as opposed to like, so it's one of those things where I read something on the internet.
Right.
And I immediately, like you're talking about the headline.
Right.
And now that is like the gospel truth for me instead of doing any sort of research. So they're hoping, I think, people read this like, well, that confuses me, so that must be wrong. Yeah. I mean, what you're point you're trying to make confuses me. Right. Therefore, the Bible must be wrong. Like what?
Yeah, I don't get that one. That one is the worst so far.
Yep.
All right, well, that's going to wrap up the main segment for today. We'll hit the last 5 next week. This is a fun little 3-week series.
Yep.
But let's go on.
Oh, do we get some AI action today?
AI action. Okay. All right. I thought this would be fun given what we've been talking about these past 2 weeks.
Okay.
Here is a list of the top 10 moments in pop culture that challenged our faith.
Oh, okay.
See if any of these challenged your
faith. And this
faith.
is from AI.
This is from AI. ChatGPT tells us the top 10 things, list of the top 10 moments in pop culture that challenged our faith. Number 10, the COVID-19 pandemic. It says the pandemic has raised questions about the role of faith in times of crisis and challenged traditional Christian beliefs about suffering, healing, and the nature of God.
Interesting.
Do you think that did that at all?
I don't think so at all. What I do think it did was it challenged people's perception of Christians because of the way Christians responded to the COVID-19 pandemic.
I think that's accurate.
Super extreme on every side of everything that was made. Like it just, it cut deep into our comfort and into our traditions. Okay. And I think that led to the world then seeing that, oh, dang, like the church doesn't have their stuff together.
Right.
I don't necessarily want to be a part of that. So that's like the only like potential challenge isn't to faith.
Right.
It's to like the organized local church bodies.
Well, one of the things, I mean, I talked about, this is kind of one of the things I've actually said quite a bit, is that we as Christians have been saying for quite some time, you know, one of the things we say is that ultimately nothing you do is going to really take you, like your job, your health, your money, like all of these things ultimately can fail. And we live like in Fort Collins, Colorado. It's a very well-off community overall. Right. And so for the most part, people could rely on all those things. They never had a need for God because they had all these other good things. And COVID-19 brought into light that all of that stuff can be lost in an instant. Like people were losing jobs, people were losing health, people were losing all these things that were their constants.
Right.
Like the church had this perfect opportunity to be able to say, look, all of those things can fail, but there's one thing that can't, and that's God. And instead, we just fought internally about whether or not to wear masks or what to do about the government asking you to do this or that. Like we took the perfect opportunity where we can actually talk about why we need God and instead just fought.
Right.
And it just seems a big waste. So that was bothersome to me.
And that ties into our topic of the podcast, because it's not that the Bible contradicts itself, it's that Christians contradict each other.
Yep.
Because we sometimes ignore scripture in the Bible and what it tells us to do. So,
all right, number 9, the hashtag Me Too movement.
Okay.
The widespread recognition of sexual harassment and assault in popular culture, this is interesting, challenged traditional Christian beliefs about gender roles and the treatment of women. I don't know if that's accurate, to me at least.
I did not experience
that
type of challenge.
Well, and like traditional Christian beliefs about gender roles was not something that came about from the Me Too movement.
No.
Now, maybe we had some issues of like pastors getting involved in situations where they weren't doing what they should have done.
Yeah, there's actually a movement right now, and I don't know if I'm going to pronounce it right. It's either tradewife or tradwife, because there's no E on the word.
Oh, yeah, but it's traditional.
Like one word. Yeah, so traditional is what it means. So it's like talking tradwife.
Tradwife?
I don't know. It's on my list of podcasts. It's one, like I'm 3 podcasts away from listening to an episode from one that I follow about this and whether or not it's biblical. So I'm excited to listen to that.
Okay.
But yeah, it's one of those things where there's like just these traditional gender roles that people are holding tight to. And so I guess that might be the opposite of what this is talking about from the Me Too movement, because the trad wife is holding tight to those traditional roles of a wife. Yeah. And the Me Too is trying to say they don't matter. Like, is that what that's
what it seems like. That's another one. All right. So far, ChatGPT, you're
over 2.
We're not doing great. All right. Number 8. The popularity of alternative spiritual practices. Practices such as meditation, yoga, and mindfulness have gained popularity in recent years, challenging traditional Christian beliefs about the nature of spirituality and the role of religious institutions. So maybe this isn't challenging it for us as Christians, but challenging the general culture perception of Christians.
So I might agree with that one then.
Yeah.
Because I do think the dominance of other spiritual practices in our world today has at least caused people to be like, well,
why do I need the church? I can do spirituality in all these ways.
I also think things like mindfulness and yoga don't have to be attached to negative spiritual practices, I guess would be the
What
way
does
to
it mean
phrase
by
that.
mindfulness? Is that just...
Right, that would be my question, because I mean, my watch every morning says, hey, as you start your day, take a moment for yourself to practice mindfulness.
Right.
And I think it's just like,
I don't know.
From my interpretation, and I'm probably completely wrong from what like the spirituality of it is, but it's just take a moment to breathe, think through, okay, what does this day have for me? Right. I use it as an opportunity to remind me to, hey, pray. Yeah. Like center yourself on Christ for the day.
So all of that's good.
Right. That's my mindfulness, is I'm being mindful of Jesus in my life today.
Right.
And then what are my responsibilities now?
Makes sense.
That might not be what they're going for. And for me, yoga has always just been like stretching. Right. I've never associated that with any sort of meditation or like negative,
Right. Yoga to me is going to be one of those like a food sacrifice to idols situations where there are some people who it might have some connotation and spiritual connection that they don't want to do. But if you don't have that and you want to stretch, then stretch.
Yeah. And I don't do yoga.
Right.
But for a while I was doing the P90X stuff. And one of their things is a yoga one.
Oh man, that was a good one.
And I always just associated that with making my body hurt by trying to stretch in ways that are not natural for me.
Yeah, I did P90X3 for a little bit,
Yeah.
and their yoga, the one guy who was like the advanced move would do this thing where he started on his hands and it would move into a handstand.
Since we're filming this, do you want to try it right now?
Yeah, no, I don't. It was awful.
All right, next one.
This is kind of the same, but just a different direction. Number 7, the growth of the New Age movement.
Okay.
This movement, which includes practices such as astrology, crystal healing, and alternative spirituality, has gained popularity in recent years and again challenged traditional Christian beliefs about the nature of spirituality and the role of religious institutions.
Okay, so yeah, it does seem that this is just challenging a culture, not
right.
That's not my personal faith. What is this doing to the church as a whole and to people's perceptions of Christianity and the Bible? So yeah, that one makes sense. I would say, in addition to that, there's one that's seeped even more into the church. That's the New Apostolic Reformation movement.
Yes. That's
where it is. Some of it, I think, has some like these New Age practices, but it's all seeped in really bad theology.
Yep.
And is taking over a lot of big churches and mega popular speakers. And so a lot of people who are Christians or churchgoers are very subtly falling into some false scriptural beliefs because of the NARM, the New Apostolic Reformation movement.
Yeah, that's interesting. Number 6. All right. The legalization of same-sex marriage. The legal recognition of same-sex marriage shall challenge traditional Christian beliefs about the nature of marriage and the role of sexuality in human relationships. I'd say this one's starting now that we're getting higher in the list. We are starting to see more of what this has done in pop culture in our society that has led a lot of people maybe to say, I don't want to be a Christian anymore.
Right. I don't think it's challenged traditional Christian beliefs like that just said it did.
Okay.
I think it's challenged other people's opinions of traditional Christian beliefs.
Right.
Because I'm still in the camp of Scripture hasn't changed.
Right.
No matter what the law says, Scripture is not changing.
Right.
God's word doesn't change. And
right.
So my then response is now, it's not changing my beliefs about God's word. It's now changing, okay, how do I engage with culture and law as a Christian? Yeah,
that's actually, that's really interesting the way that kind of shakes out in that sense. But yeah, I think this has definitely caused a lot of people to question Christianity because they have to make a choice of like, do I follow or they have to make a new kind of Christianity that says it's all okay.
Right. Yep. And we've seen that. We've seen churches that have started with this idea of
acceptance that it is perfectly fine for like same-sex marriage and relationship to exist in the Christian framework.
Right.
Interesting. Number 5, the Oprah Winfrey Show. I kind of wanted to just leave it there and be like, yep, that's it. That's it. The popular talk show hosted by Oprah Winfrey featured many guests and discussions that challenged traditional Christian beliefs and promoted alternative spiritual practices. They're using that phrase a lot. But I do agree with this in that the Oprah Winfrey Show was very, very huge for so long.
Yep.
And you did have a lot of people coming on with like, if you remember, it was really big for a while, The Secret.
Yeah.
And the whole idea of The Secret was that whatever you think about is what you'll attract in your life. So it's like, if I think about negative and getting beat up and things like that, then that's what's going to happen to me. And if I think about being successful, or if I just focus more of my time on thinking about getting money, then I'll get that. Right. It'll attract it into me like through the universe. I had an employee once who was huge into this, and she was like, well, the reason I follow this is because I tried it. Like I started for a week just thinking about this one item, and then all of a sudden it just showed up. Like I found it. So therefore I knew the universe brought it to me. And so now I do that with everything in my life.
So we'll do a experiment for the next month. I'm going to, as often as I can, think about a PlayStation 5.
Yes.
And if it just shows up on my doorstep one day, then I know that the secret works.
Sweet. And then you'll start preaching the secret gospel.
Or I'll know that someone heard me mention that just now. And I was like, oh, I have 4 of them. I'll give Matt one. I don't know who has 4 PS5s. That's weird. That's all I know of Oprah. You get a car, you get a car, you get a car. Everybody gets a car.
Right. We also had
like her favorite things at Christmas time. Was super fun.
Yeah. They had I want to say it was called The Shack.
Yeah.
And that was a huge like Christian novel that was super weird theologically. All right, we're going
if
really
you're just
slow
listening
on
to
these.
us, Nathan put the word Christian in quotes on that Christian
sorry.
novel because not everyone's watching, some are listening. So yeah,
that's right. Thanks for reminding me.
Yeah.
All right, we'll
work through these last ones.
This one's interesting. The controversy surrounding the Passion of the Christ movie. This movie, directed by Mel Gibson, sparked debates among Christians about the portrayal of violence in the film and whether it accurately represented the message of the Bible.
Yeah, go ahead and just read the Bible. And you're good to go.
Right. I like the Passion, though. It's great.
I liked it, too. I think there's a lot of violence in the Bible.
Yeah.
If the Bible were to be fully made into a movie,
it would be such
very
a hard
R. Yeah.
Number 3, the rise of atheism and secularism in popular culture. This one's good. In recent years, high-profile atheists such as Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris have gained significant followings, challenging traditional religious beliefs and calling for a secular approach to morality and ethics. So you had especially in the early 2000s, this like 4 horsemen of the atheist apocalypse. They called it Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins. I don't remember the other 2. I think this one kind of peaked and then has kind of subsided a little bit. But you did have this like explosive rise of like not just being an atheist and saying, I don't believe in the Bible, but being like, I'm going to attack people who do.
Yep.
It's definitely interesting.
Yeah. I highly recommend Unbelievable with Justin Brierley. It's another podcast.
Did you hear about Justin Brierley?
No.
He's leaving the show.
Oh, no.
It's
not
going to
be Unbelievable with someone else. But go back and listen to some of those old episodes because they do debates between Christians and atheists often about some big topics. And it's just a really cool opportunity to engage in some of those conversations that this AI might be talking about that has led to some of the fallout.
Number 2, the Harry Potter series. The popularity of the Harry Potter books and movies led to debates among Christians about the appropriateness of the series, with some arguing that it promoted witchcraft and the occult.
Yeah, what is so interesting to me, and maybe we'll talk about this another time, or did we already talk about this a little bit on a previous one?
We might have.
Okay, is Christians were so quick to condemn Harry Potter and so quick to heavily promote Chronicles of Narnia and Lord of the Rings.
Yep, we did talk about this a little.
Man, these are incredible just Christian value, but they're wizards and witches.
Right.
But Harry Potter was
the bad one. I don't like that.
I like the books and the movies of all 3 of those series that I just mentioned.
Did you hear they're rebooting them as a series on HBO?
I did hear. We'll see what happens.
I think that could be fun because it can let you actually do them a little more in depth. And I did hear a rumor, and now this is probably just a rumor, but they were saying that I don't remember his name, Tom Felton, I want to say. The kid who played Draco Malfoy is going to come back as the dad, as Lucius Malfoy.
Oh, that's funny.
Which, if that's true, that would be awesome.
That's kind of cool.
All right, number 1, the publication of The Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown. This best-selling novel and the subsequent movie adaptation challenged many people's understanding of Christian history and theology and raised questions about the divinity of Jesus and the role of Mary Magdalene.
Yeah.
This was big at the time. Like, everybody said, oh, we can't believe the Bible because of this book, this novel, The Da Vinci Code.
Yeah.
If you remember that, it was crazy.
I agree that moment in pop culture might be a huge turning point for a lot of people.
That's a good one as number 1, I think. Yeah.
So well done, ChatGPT. Again, I think you nailed it when you just said this novel.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. People took this novel and like, but it's based off the truth. And I'm like, no, you're really just kind of making stuff up, but good
on you.
All right.
That's fun.
We're going to do a real quick listener mail because we skipped it last week. I had somebody write in with a question as a potential podcast topic.
Okay.
And it was, is it ever okay for a Christian to give up on their marriage? Oh, kind of a heavy topic, like to walk away from it. Like what, if any, are the reasons why that can be allowed?
Yeah. Okay.
It's kind of a tough and heavy subject. So something interesting to talk about. Yeah. And then we also had an email, because we keep talking about all this ChatGPT stuff, talking about layoffs he's seen across the industry were not AI related, but just excess employees. And he said maybe in a few years, the things will be different. I do think he's, and he kind of goes on talking about, AI and if it's going to take jobs.
Okay.
I think we're going to see it start taking more jobs. Some of these newer developments I've seen even in this last couple of weeks, this was crazy. Adobe just released a tool for their video editing where it will analyze, like if, let's say we've got like a talking head video, like an interview with somebody. And a lot of times when we make a video like that, you'll want to put like some B-roll footage over it to just kind of mix it up a little bit. it will take your script and it'll analyze it and it'll figure out from their Adobe library good B-roll, and it'll automatically put it in at key moments.
What?
You can give it a full script that you've written, and it will actually create storyboards and animatics and like a list of the shots you need to make.
Wow.
Like you can have it add sound effects. It'll analyze the video and be like, oh, there's water coming in here. We're gonna add the sound of the ocean. And this is just the early stages of it. I do think we are gonna start seeing some big changes.
That's exciting.
We'll see how that goes.
Yep.
Well, again, as always, if you'd like to email us, podcast@dfchurch.com. Let us know what you think. Be a part of the listener mail section, or now viewer mail if you're watching this. Yep. Let us know, were you listening to this or watching this or both?
Yeah.
And we'll see you next week.
Bye, guys.